So stay with me for a second. Do we need climaxes? Like, is this something that is actually essential to storytelling? Because it just seems tired and trite and really unfulfilling, at least for me. And I know like the monomyth and like a lot of the characters are like all about like the falling action and the climax and then like all of these things. And it's just like, I don't like them. I can't think of a single example where I was more fulfilled because we had this huge action scene. And some of the emotional ones like really pay off. Like, I thought about this because I just finished Shang Chi and I liked it for the first like half, and the second half was practically brutal. I'm like, I wanted to love this movie, but I was so bored. Where did the dragon come from? Why do we have soul suckers? Is this fulfilling at all? And then we kind of ended and I was like, okay, I feel nothing. I felt lots for him in the beginning. I thought the flashbacks were really cool. I thought a lot of it was really interesting. And then we just feel like we jump the shark every time we climax. Well, that's an interesting sentence I just said. I've been meaning to watch Kim's Convenience since it aired, and I'm just very bad at getting to new shows. I'm like very much afraid, but since I know Simu Liu and I really liked his performance, I decided to finally give it a chance, and it's wonderful. It's never gonna be like my favorite show, I don't think, but I'm really enjoying the story. And one of the things that I remembered is like, this is so much better because they're not trying to make like conflict that we can then solve by the end of the plot. And it's just so refreshing. And one of my biggest revelations on BookTube has been that I really like boring books. I'm exhausted and frustrated often. If you say something is action-packed and explosive and fast-paced, I'm like, let me run that action-paced thing away. I want nothing to do with this. And I think that even though fantasy is one of my favorite genres, it's kind of why I've stepped away from it the last few years. I like it. I like the storytelling. I like the world building. I like the writing. I like the characters. I'm just fed up with why do we always have to have action scenes? And it's not that I hate action scenes. I love action scenes. A lot of action scenes are my favorite action scenes in the whole movie. Like, I think the bus scene was really, really good. I enjoyed that a lot. It showed a lot of character. It showed a lot of things. But when we just seen the end, like, there wasn't anything in focus. There was just big monsters. There was no emotional stake in there. And even like the 10 rings and the like drawing on his hand and stuff like that, I thought that was super cool when he did that. I just didn't find the final battle better. So I'm not like saying don't give me action scenes, because I like action scenes. I just almost always zone out during the final action scene. I'm gonna keep a theme of Marvel because that is what I've been thinking about a lot lately. But I can say the same thing about Wandavision. Wandavision was a fantastic show. What was the last end? Like, that last episode, I'm like, do we even go here? Why do we have this? Like, it's completely unnecessary and completely unsatisfying. And I think almost every single person said that. And it's like, people believe in this outdated system that has to conform to a certain way, that we have to have this final battle, otherwise it won't be satisfactory. There are some great examples of stories where we subvert expectations and things end peacefully instead of one. Magnus Chase is a great example of this, where he is not a fighter. He has a talking sword that fights for him, but he is, in the end, a healer, and that is kind of his story. So when you get to the final ending, we don't actually use weapon and a sword play to win that story. And I think that that is a great example of stories where it's like, you can have the emotional stakes so much more if you don't. And that's the thing, is I really like emotional stakes. I love characters, I love world building, and I love writing. And the more that I read and the more that I enjoy media, the more that I just am aware of how much I just really like boring books. And by that I don't mean boring books where nothing happens. I'm just so fed up with stories that are so just tied to the idea that we need to have a great ending, where we need to have something dramatic happening. A lot of people talk about this in romance, the third act breakup. Why do we need that? Like, I'm not a huge romance reader, but it's still frustrating to know that, yeah, like, you know, 3/4 into the novel, they're gonna break up and they're gonna have some huge conflict and blah, 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 blah. And no one cares and everyone knows it's gonna be over, and it's so purposeless. The same thing is almost every action movie, fantasy novel, sci-fi novel. Unless it's subverting something and trying to be super dramatic, we know that the person's going to win. Why spend so much time being useless in the story with no emotional takes? If you're gonna make it emotional, yes, awesome, I love it. And again, I like cool scenes, like, I like emotional scenes, but even in the scenes where there was a scene that kind of reminded me similarly of, like, since the beginning of Shang-Chi, I knew that there was probably going to be a scene similar to something that happens in Endgame that I absolutely loved. Think Hammer. And I love that scene, and I like shouted, and it was so great. And I was like, I saw this scene coming and was like, oh, it's gonna be such an awesome scene. But because there was no emotionality and it was just in this kerfuffle and I didn't really have the explanation of why this mattered so much, even though I was expecting it and was expected to be like super cool by it, it didn't do anything for me. We're getting a lot better in media and books and stuff like that at kind of bending the way that we look at characters, at how we look at good and evil, how we look at diversity and representation and women and like all of these things. But why are we still so tied to the idea that Marvel movies or action movies or fantasy movies or romances or all of these have to have something at the big end to make it a satisfactory journey? If we talk about Brandon Sanderson and his world building and stuff like that, it's important to have payoff. It's important to make promises and then fulfill those promises. But I don't think that those promises are often fulfilled by a big action sequence or by a climax. Like, we can have climaxes that are quieter. And it's just so frustrating to me that it seems that even though we're growing so much, we're still so tied to the idea that we need to have this big scene, this explosive, wonderful, great scene. And I love mysteries. I love figuring out and putting the pieces together. I'm not against action scenes or betrayal or about like all of these dramatic things. I just want them to not be so predictable, to not be so boring. Like, I say that I like boring books, but I'm just bored by the need to keep to tradition when it comes to these things. Why can't we have stories in which they're a little bit more exciting than a climax? And I feel like I'm sounding like I didn't come into this video thinking about a sex metaphor, but it's like the same thing. It's like, if a relationship, if you're trying to have like a lasting wand impact on a relationship and you're like, only if I climax I will be happy, then it's like, yes, but you're missing everything that makes a sustaining relationship. It's not just sex. And like, I feel like movies and books and so many of the other things are so believing in the idea that you have to have this like big, awesome, great scene at the end and it's gonna fix all your issues. You see the sex metaphor here. And it's not gonna happen. Like, it's not worth it if you don't have the groundwork, if you don't have the relationship. It's like the insta love of things, and it's just so dang frustrating. And I didn't come in here with any thoughts about what I wanted to say other than I am like just so frustrated and so unsatisfied, and I just want some boring books. I want stories that have good payoff and have great moments, but I'm just so fed up with the need to have this great big ending when so often it's just so dumb and so unsatisfactory. I'm not against fantasy, it's one of my favorite genres, but like, if Shang Chi hadn't have had the fantastical elements, it would have been like a 9 out of 10 story. Like, I loved the beginning so much and I thought it was so wonderful, and then I was just like, I don't care. Like, I don't know why this is important and I don't care, and it's just big for no apparent reason, and we're having these dramatic character moments that weren't built up to enough, and I'm just frustrated and I wanted to love this. I thought the same thing with a lot that happened in Falcon Winter Soldier. I was like, okay, so but why do we have this big moment? Do we need to have a little bit more build up? But because you want to reveal something to us, you're not doing this. Think of Sherlock had the same issue where like they kept on trying to build up and make this mystery and make everything so much bigger rather than just telling good stories. Why are we so like, I'm just so tired of stories believing that they have to make something so big that they lose the actual story, that they lose the importance, that they lose the good writing and the good characters because they want to make something big. And I'm so frustrated with it. It's just so annoying to me that we can't just sit back and just enjoy slow stories. And I know slow stories can be boring. Some stories are just, I'm like, okay, but what is happening in the story? So I understand the need for fast-paced books and the need to have things like move along. But like, so often I think that like, the fast stories would be more enjoyable for me if it wasn't so predictable. If we have more diversity in the way that stories happen, if we have more diversity in the way that like we have great stories. And maybe I shouldn't be looking to Marvel movies for this, but this isn't just a Marvel movie issue. It's just, I'm thinking about Marvel movies because it's what I watched. I feel like this also came along a little bit because I've been reading Whereabouts by Juma Lahiri, and it's great and nothing happens in it. And it was so wonderful and so whimsical. Not even whimsical, it was like quite spare in its writing style, but it was just like this person's life and we didn't know the character and we didn't know anything, and it was just like, we existed. I really like books where we just get to exist. I had the same issue when I was a young child and watching, I wasn't that young, I was a teenager. I was like 18. When I was like 18 and watching, I remember when I was like 18 and watching Once Upon a Time and just being so frustrated by the end of each season. They just had to have this huge thing where, like, you know, this new witch came to town or like this new curse. And I was just like, but why can't they like let them live for an episode? Like, if we don't have this powerful battle or this powerful new evil, I'll still watch. Like, and maybe that's part of it too. Like, I'm just so frustrated with like the lack of trust in an audience that it's like you hear all this dumb crap about, like, you know, social media, blah, 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 keeps us from actually having eventful stories, and we have to like make sure that no one's bored within 10 seconds. But can you give us a story in which something doesn't have to happen every 10 minutes or 40 minutes or, you know, at the end of each episode? Like, just trust the fact that we'll still watch even if something explosive and fast-paced doesn't work. Like, I don't need escalation. I actually just really enjoy stories for story's sake. Maybe I'm an anomaly, maybe I'm just a strange person who likes boring things, but I'm just like, I really wish people trusted the audience more, that they trusted the fact that they can be inventful with storytelling, like that we can have humor, and also that these stories aren't always just going to be like super dramatic or super funny and like underpinning and not really dealing with things. No, I just actually want to just exist inside stories. I just want to exist and be able to have stories in which they live. See, all of this is just me saying that I want slice of life. Like, I just really enjoy those stories. And I wish there was more fantasy novels. I wish there was more action things and, you know, spy things that were allowed to be more everyday, that were allowed to have these great stories that weren't hinged upon this great dramatic thing at the end. And that's the story. And that's a story about how I went off the cuff and got angry about climaxes, because that's the kind of person I is. I just want less escalation, okay? Am I alone in this? Am I the only one who's just really aggravated by the fact that I am so bored and frustrated at the end because I wish they just stayed in the character, or they just stayed smaller, or they didn't feel the need to like go and make something really big? I just like the small ones, okay? Give me something small. Give me something, and not even small, just but like intimate, everyday, regular, I don't know. Actually, one of my favorite stories because of this is The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness, which the whole like stick of it is the fact that they're not like supernatural. They just live in a town where these people are like saving everyone and they're being super dramatic, and meanwhile they're just dealing with everyday things, and everyone's like, it's so boring. I'm like, this is my story. Can I have every story? Anyways, I'm writing a fantasy novel in which literally nothing happens. Like, I don't know how to market it because I'm like, there is going to be no big climax. Like, I just want people to live their life, but also have magic in the world. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this random video that I had lots of thoughts on, and have a great day. I'm going to end this with double entendrely drinking my tea. I'm going to end this by double entendrely drinking my tea. And that's when the aliens came.